In the grimy neighborhoods of early 20th century America, a figure rose to infamy whose notoriety would shape countless true crime legends and dark history sagas. This man, known by many as one of the most notorious kingpins in the world of organized crime, is still remembered for his dramatic story of power, brutality, and eventual decline. His background in the underworld secrets of Prohibition would establish him as a leading name in infamous syndicates, overshadowing many crime families of his era. This is the story of Alphonse Gabriel Capone, famously known as Al Capone, a saga of ambition, betrayal, triumph, and downfall that continues to captivate those interested in real mafia stories, unsolved mysteries, and the grim reality of big city corruption. Chapter 1. Struggling Beginnings in Brooklyn. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born in 1899 in the densely populated borough of Brooklyn, New York. His family, immigrants from Italy, arrived on American soil in search of better opportunities. This quest for a fresh start was common among countless families who left behind poverty and hardship in southern Italy for the promise of new horizons in the United States. Yet the challenges they unwittingly embraced were far more complicated than they could have imagined. Alphonse's father, Gabriel, worked as a humble barber, while his mother, Teresa, sewed and mended clothes to help sustain the family. They occupied a cramped home in the rough-and-tumble environment of Brooklyn, a place where adversity, competition, and raw survival instincts reigned supreme. Like many households sharing the immigrant experience, the Capones held respect for law and order and made every effort to assimilate. However, with a large family to feed, 9 children in total, it took monumental effort to keep everyone afloat. The gritty streets that surrounded their block shaped a young Alphonse's worldview. Poverty was as tangible as the brick walls that loomed overhead. Local gangs formed in alleys, and unscrupulous characters roamed every corner. Territorial disputes, theft, and violence were commonplace. These scenes became the backdrop to Alphonse's formative years, exposing him to the reality of street life in a way few could escape. Standing amidst tough circumstances, a tender-hearted child might have been easily frightened by roving delinquents. But Alphonse was different. Even at a young age, he displayed an unshakable will, one that would become the hallmark of his future image. In that environment, forging alliances was crucial, and from an early age, Alphonse learned that sometimes sheer force could settle disputes more readily than negotiation. Before he reached his teenage years, Alphonse had not only witnessed acts of street violence, but had also come to understand that stepping over certain moral lines often provided shortcuts to attaining power. Unsurprisingly, his involvement in petty mischief escalated. By the age of 14, Alphonse took an aggressive stand when he established his first gang, a raucous group called the Navy Street Gang. Revered by some youths who admired his boldness, this organization was aimed at protecting Italian girls from harassment by Irish boys in the area. In forming the Navy Street Gang, Alphonse discovered his aptitude for leadership. He wasn't afraid to throw punches or brandish a sense of authority. True, it may seem ironic that an initial pursuit of justice for neighborhood girls would pave the way for him to embody one of the era's most frightening public enemies, but life on the streets often morphs moral lines until they become indistinguishable. With time, aggression and intimidation became his daily tools, overshadowing any modest attempt to maintain a principled life. Formal school had no place in this young rebel's life. After striking a teacher in a fit of rage, Alphonse dropped out entirely around the same time he took charge of his small gang. This decision cut him off from a traditional path to better prospects, but opened the door to the underworld secrets that soon beckoned him. By then, the seeds were sown for the birth of an eventual organized crime mastermind. Chapter 2. First forays into the criminal underworld. Although the environment in Brooklyn was already brimming with opportunities for wrongdoing, Alphonse craved more than mere petty theft or random brawls on street corners. As a teenager, he drifted into local saloons, the bustling hubs where tough men met to drink, gamble, and plot. These dens teemed with notorious kingpins of their own, smaller but lethal. Through these chance encounters, Al Capone, still in his teens, caught the attention of gangsters who recognized that fearless spark in him. One of the first significant personalities he encountered was Frankie Yale. Yale, immersed in a variety of illegal activities, operated a bar in Coney Island known as the Harvard Inn. This establishment was no average watering hole, but rather a lawless playground that also hosted brothels and other illicit activities on the side. The environment was violent and edgy. People who failed to settle their debts faced the wrath of hired enforcers, while intoxication-fueled brawls often ended with bloodshed. In short, perfect training ground for an ambitious youth like Al. The Harvard Inn introduced him to the realities behind organized crime, structured operations, specific hierarchies, and brutal discipline. Hired on Yale's recommendation to handle collections and intimidate delinquent customers, Capone exhibited a willingness to use violence when demanded. Also haunting these shadows were figures like Johnny Torrio and Lucky Luciano, major players associated with infamous syndicates, forging networks within and beyond New York. Through them, Alphonse glimpsed the broader framework that made real mafia stories possible: established connections to supply routes, bribed law enforcement, hush money for local politicians. He became more than a brutish street enforcer. He learned that the craft of organized crime was not just about intimidation, but about stealth, deviance, and forging alliances with the right people. Chapter 3. The Origin of Scarface. It was at Yale's Harvard Inn that Alphonse's life took a sharp twist, one that would tag him with a lasting moniker: Scarface. Legends about how he acquired that nickname vary. One stormy night, while he was working as a bartender, he made inappropriate advances toward a woman. Some speculated he spoke offensive remarks to her, or that he simply provoked the wrong individual. Either way, when the woman's brother, Frank Galucio, a fierce local gangster, confronted him, tensions escalated. Goaded into a fight, Galucio slashed Alphonse's face with a razor-sharp weapon, leaving deep gashes that stretched across his cheek from ear to mouth. Rushed to quick medical attention, Al survived, but carried a gruesome reminder that turned into a permanent feature of his persona. Despite wearing hats or angling his head in photographs to hide the disfiguring scars, the public seized upon this iconic look, immortalizing him as Scarface. What's most interesting about this is that Capone actually despised the nickname. Those who knew him personally mentioned how he always tried to dodge images capturing that side of his face. Yet ironically, it was precisely this signature scar that elevated him into the realm of dark history icons, later fueling cinematic portrayals of the brutal gangster with the unforgettable smirk. Chapter 4. A brief departure from the crime life. Strangely enough, soon after sustaining the scar, Alphonse nearly escaped his life of crime altogether. Having married Mary Coughlin, he found himself eager to stabilize his future. With a new wife and a newborn son named Albert Francis, he recognized a pressing need for a stable income. Brooklyn's constant gang brawls and shady deals seemed to be an endless road of risk and mayhem. So, around age 19, Capone took a leap away from Frankie Yale's bar and headed to Baltimore, where a close contact helped him land a respectable job as an accountant. During this brief respite, he embraced the responsibilities of fatherhood, sharpened his skills with numbers, and discovered an unexpected knack for finance. Those meticulous ledger-keeping talents would later serve him well when he needed to coordinate the labyrinthine financial aspects of organized crime. Distracted with family matters and corporate routine, it seemed possible that Scarface might ultimately settle down as a typical breadwinner, but heartache soon found him again. The sudden death of his father, Gabriel, from a heart attack, forced Alphonse back into the clutches of the Brooklyn streets. The respectable job was vacated overnight. The comfort of a slow but honest path was overshadowed by the looming demands of extended family obligations and old neighborhood ties. The yearning for quick money was too strong, and the siren call of true crime soon reclaimed him. Chapter 5. A Summons to the Windy City. Despite some measure of success in the New York underworld, Alphonse's volatile temper worried influential allies like Frankie Yale and Lucky Luciano. They viewed him as too hot-headed, a liability who might attract law enforcement attention, a resource they could ill afford to lose. Meanwhile, Johnny Torrio, established in Chicago, needed a loyal lieutenant with muscle to assist him in expanding his criminal operat. Ions. The solution? Send Capone to the Midwest armed with $2,000 and some words of caution and guidance? Capone arrived in Chicago in 1921, accompanied by his wife and child. The city was on the brink of major transformation during the Prohibition era. With the sale, production, and transportation of alcohol made illegal, bootleggers were thriving. Illicit distilleries popped up in garages and back alleys. Speakeasies replaced saloons, operating behind concealed doors protected by bribes and secrecy. The hush-hush environment was a spawning ground for determined criminals ready to capitalize on America's thirst for liquor. For aspiring, notorious kingpins, it was a golden opportunity. Johnny Torrio, whom Capone considered a mentor, had grand plans to elevate his territory into one of the largest criminal enterprises in the country. The city's fractious political climate and widespread corruption offered plenty of chances to bribe public officials. Capone, adapting rapidly, began weaving himself into the city's underbelly. The synergy between Torrio's organization and Capone's unbridled ambition pointed to a shift in Chicago's dark history. Chapter 6. Learning under Johnny Torrio. Torrio ran his illegal empire with a combination of calculated cunning and unflinching ruthlessness. He believed in forging alliances as much as issuing threats. Capone keenly observed how Torrio balanced money and muscle to keep everyone in line, from local politicians to policemen. There were also occasional demonstrations of raw cruelty attributing to the group's fearsome reputation. Through these experiences, the younger gangster realized that intimidation alone wasn't enough to achieve immortality. Strategy mattered. Building alliances with city officials, controlling protection rackets, and orchestrating the logistics of alcohol smuggling required organization and tact. Capone's role started modestly, working in brothels on the fringes of the operation, ensuring that no money got skimmed. He soon graduated to managing a key speakeasy, overseeing bartenders, bouncers, and smugglers. For a man who had briefly practiced accounting, the counting room was second nature. Rum rows, hidden trucks, bribes to the police. He took it all in, forging more than just business relationships. He built a network of insiders who respected him not just for brute force, but also for his generosity with money. Chicago was a battlefield at the time, though. Gangs clashed over distribution routes, territory, and the unstoppable flow of cash that Prohibition unleashed. Yet under Torrio's wing, Capone initially enjoyed enough protection and guidance to avoid crippling mistakes. In time, as their empire flourished, they started looking beyond city limits for new ventures. Chapter 7. Heading out to Cicero. In 1923, a new mayor named William E. Deaver swept into Chicago determined to crack down on the lawlessness saturating the city. This sudden moral crusade threatened to upend Torrio and Capone's intricate enterprise. Speakeasies shuttered, raids multiplied, and authorities took renewed interest in halting organized crime networks. Despite the corruption that still festered among local officials, the heat was intensifying. Torrio had no intention of letting his multi-million-dollar empire go up in smoke, so he and Capone hatched a plan: relocate the main base of operations to the nearby suburb of Cicero. Cicero, in contrast to Chicago's urban sprawl, was smaller but still well located for their contraband shipments. They applied the same methodology: bribing key officials, intimidating rivals, and establishing control over local institutions. Among these institutions were gambling dens, brothels, and of course, hidden bars. To legitimize their presence, they even meddled in local politics, banking on the re-election of politicians who'd turn a blind eye to lawless activities. The plan was to put the local Republican figure, Joseph Z. Clenha, into office. This was the era's prime example of underworld secrets in action. Election day arrived in March 1924, and Al Capone, joined by his brothers Frank and Ralph, orchestrated an intimidating spectacle. Gangs roamed just outside polling stations, ensuring that every single vote cast lined up with their chosen candidate. Fistfights and gun threats were widespread, an experience so dreadful that voters resorted to calling in emergency reinforcements. Plainclothes police officers intervened, leading to violent chaos on the streets. Capitalizing on confusion and misidentification, law enforcement shot and killed Frank Capone the moment he reached for his weapon. This traumatic event alienated Capone, devastating him and igniting a bitterness that would never fully subside. Nevertheless, their meddling succeeded. Clenha retained leadership of Cicero, Despite personal tragedy, the group's criminal expansion marched on. Chapter 8. Clash with the Irish factions. By 1924, Prohibition was at its height, fueling infusions of cash into breweries run by the underworld. Competing crime families included not just Italian Americans, but also Irish syndicates who'd established smuggling routes long before. Dean O'Banion's Irish mob was especially entrenched in Chicago, controlling strategic parts of the liquor trade. It was inevitable that the expanding Torrio Capone empire would collide with O'Banion's gang, culminating in a series of turf wars that painted the windy streets with blood. Aligned with the Irish gangsters were Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moran, feared individuals with a track record of professional kills. Initially, O'Banion directed hits at Johnny Torrio, seeking an advantage over the Italians. In retaliation, in November 1924, O'Banion was ambushed and killed in his own flower shop by men loyal to Torrio. This assassination incensed the Irish outfit, intensifying a vendetta that caught Capone's attention. Another attempt soon followed to eliminate Torrio. That brazen gun attack nearly succeeded, leaving Torrio grievously wounded. Disheartened by repeated close calls, Torrio withdrew from daily operations, effectively passing full control to Capone. Capone's accession as the driving force behind Chicago's largest criminal network was not uncontested. He faced off against the still vengeful Irish, led by Moran and Weiss. Jaime Weiss met a bloody demise in 1926, gunned down as he emerged from a shop. This removal of Weiss further consolidated Capone's status, but Moran wasn't ready to relent. The rivalry culminated in one of the era's most brutal events, the Valentine's Day Massacre. It was a time when dark history overshadowed the city, and Al Capone emerged as the undisputed kingpin of the narrative. Chapter 9. Valentine's Day Massacre. The Bloody Crescendo, February 14, 1929, a date etched in real Mafia stories for its chilling significance. On a chilly winter morning, men disguised as police officers launched a raid on a warehouse believed to be one of Bugs Moran's secret hideouts. 7 men associated with Moran's Irish outfit were ordered to line up against a wall. The intruders, brandishing submachine guns, opened fire without warning, leaving those 7 victims crumpled in a grotesque scene of bullet-riddled carnage. Despite the precision of the strike, Moran himself narrowly escaped. Had events played out differently, perhaps the entire Irish gang would have been wiped out in a single bloody day. But the grisly aftermath was enough to horrify the public. Newspapers nationwide plastered images and stories of the carnage, stamping Capone with an image of the era's most savage gangster. Although no one could stick official blame on him, it was widely presumed that the mastermind behind this orchestrated slaughter was indeed Capone. Bugs Moran, now thoroughly weakened, faded into the shadows, occasionally dabbling in small heists until his eventual incarceration. From that point onwards, Capone solidified his hold on the Chicago underworld. Yet the enormous media outcry from the Valentine's Day Massacre cast a harsh spotlight that was impossible to ignore. An already mounting public disgust at gangsterism exploded into widespread anger and condemnation. Politicians, law enforcement, and everyday citizens rallied behind the concept that this chaos had to be stopped. Seemingly unstoppable, Capone was about to face an escalating showdown with the federal government, a confrontation that would define true crime law enforcement tactics for years to come. Chapter 10. Gathering of the Bosses in Atlantic City. In May 1929, a clandestine assembly of major American underworld leaders convened in Atlantic City. Figures like Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, and Albert Anastasia gathered to strategize how best to move forward with illicit trade while minimizing gang warfare that threatened to draw too much public attention. If the heat from law enforcement became too intense, the entire network of infamous syndicates across the nation might unravel. Al Capone, at the zenith of his empire, also attended, albeit grudgingly aware that not everyone at the table regarded him as a friend. Many suspected that Capone's flamboyant style, culminating in atrocities like the Valentine's Day Massacre, made the entire organized crime ecosystem more vulnerable. His name was printed in every newspaper, saturating headlines with vivid details about bloodshed. This publicity was exactly what the underworld despised. In private discussions, some bosses felt that Capone ought to be removed. Ultimately, cooler heads prevailed by advising him to keep a low profile for a time. Capone, in a twist, interpreted laying low in the most literal way possible by orchestrating his own short-term imprisonment. Chapter 11. A curiously self-arranged arrest. Mere days after the Atlantic City conference, Capone, armed with a concealed weapon, arranged to be caught by Philadelphia police. He was charged with carrying an illegal firearm and conveniently sentenced to a year behind bars. By doing so, the gangster effectively removed himself from the chaotic environment, buying time for both the backroom tension among mob bosses to simmer down and for law enforcement scrutiny to pivot elsewhere. It was a cunning move that showcased a gangster's sense of realpolitik. In those days, the notion of unsolved mysteries around Capone only grew. Why would a man with such wealth and connections deliberately risk prison time? Some believed that favoritism or behind-the-scenes deals made his incarceration more of a paid vacation. Indeed, rumors floated that prison guards were easily bribed, ensuring that Capone enjoyed better accommodations. Regardless, he soon returned to Chicago, largely unscathed, to pick up where he left off. Except now the federal government had grown even warier of him. Chapter 12. The Godfather's Attempt at Image Control. In the late 1920s, Al Capone's face was synonymous with the term public enemy. Yet as brash as he was, he also craved public adoration and acceptance. In an attempt at damage control, he began making more appearances at civic events, sporting matches, and philanthropic endeavors. He publicly donated money to soup kitchens and charities, particularly in the wake of the 1929 stock market crash that jolted the nation into the Great Depression. City newspapers trumpeted Capone's kindness in handing out meals to the hungry. He was seen mingling at horse races, betting on dogs, cheering at baseball games, and even forging superficial friendships with certain politicians who enjoyed the limelight that came from being photographed with a notorious celebrity. Through these stunts, Capone tried to recast his image from merciless gangster to a quasi-Robin Hood figure, one who might break some rules but fundamentally wanted to aid struggling families. Did it succeed? Yes and no. Among certain lower-income communities, the free meals were indeed welcomed. But for law enforcement, his rosy portrayal was nothing more than a distraction from the contraband, violence, and corruption he orchestrated behind the scenes. Chapter 13. Public Enemy Number 1. By the early 1930s, the tides of popular opinion had turned sharply against Capone. So too had the apprehensions of government agencies. The Valentine's Day massacre, frequently cited in true crime annals, had scorched the gangster's reputation beyond repair. Politicians railed against him in fiery speeches. Civic leaders lamented his stranglehold on the local justice system. Reporters, once hungry for sensational quotes, now demanded swift action to end Capone's tyranny. Publications labeled him the top public menace in the land, yet prosecuting him for his violent crimes was maddeningly difficult. Witnesses to murders refused to speak, either from intimidation or outright bribes. Politicians, judges, and police officers who might have indicted him were compromised. Murder charges never stuck, bootlegging allegations fizzled without unimpeachable evidence, and extortion cases vanished in a mire of hush money. Capone loomed as the ultimate untouchable, ironically overshadowing the famed group assigned to hunt him, known as the Untouchables, led by Eliot Ness. Ness and his squad tried to clamp down on the gangster empire by raiding breweries and intercepting trucks of bootleg liquor. While these efforts cut some of Capone's revenue streams, they weren't potent enough to dismantle the operation. Desperate for a solution, the federal government explored alternative angles, and they decided on a simpler-sounding but lethal approach: prosecuting Capone for tax evasion. Chapter 14. The Tax Fraud Accusation. Among all the charges swirling around Capone, tax evasion emerged as the Achilles heel. Despite millions of dollars in annual income, Capone never declared a dime, which was illegal under federal law. A specialized division in the Treasury Department, employing accountants and financial investigators, dug through countless business records, searching for a paper trail that would connect him to enormous wealth. One accountant, Frank J. Wilson, discovered ledger entries that directly implicated Capone in gambling profits. This single thread, once pulled, unraveled an entire tapestry of financial malpractice. By 1931, the government had enough evidence to indict him on multiple counts of tax evasion. Though from a gangster's standpoint, such a charge might seem trivial compared to murder or smuggling, it was precisely the route that did not require eyewitness testimony to his violent deeds. All that was needed were well-documented unpaid taxes. That June, Capone was indicted. He believed he could manipulate the court as easily as he had manipulated city officials. In some ways, his arrogance was painfully clear. He offered to negotiate a plea deal for a shorter sentence. The authorities accepted initially. But behind the scenes, judges realized that Capone was tampering with jurors through intimidation and bribes. In a shocking turn of events, the court replaced the entire jury panel at the last minute, derailing Capone's well-laid plan. Following an intense trial drawing global press coverage, the jury deliberated, then delivered a guilty verdict within hours. This unstoppable kingpin found himself on the receiving end of an unexpectedly severe sentence: 11 years in federal prison. For that time period, this was a monumental punishment for tax fraud. Shockwaves rippled across the nation. At last, the man dubbed Public Enemy Number 1 was going to prison. Chapter 15. Early prison life and declining health. Capone's first stint was at the Cook County Jail, where he still exerted enough influence to obtain cozy privileges, telephone access, a private cell, frequent unmonitored visits. Prison life seemed far from the punishing experience most convicts endured. Some whispered that Scarface was effectively running his business from behind bars, continuing to funnel instructions to his lieutenants and collecting profits. However, an old medical issue loomed in the background that would soon degrade his autonomy. Years earlier, Capone had contracted syphilis, likely from time spent in brothels during his youth. The infection was never properly treated, and by the early 1930s, it was reaching a latent stage, eating away at his nervous system and mental faculties. Over time, the disease grew more evident, leaving him prone to confusion and erratic mood swings. The government, aware that Capone wielded clout within the Cook County facility, decided to remove him from that environment. He was transferred to the federal penitentiary in Atlanta. There, the discipline was far stricter, and paying off guards was rumored to be more challenging. The comfort and power Capone enjoyed vanished, ushering him into a world where he was no longer top dog. Even so, Atlanta was not the end of his journey. In August 1934, he was moved again, this time to a place designed to break the spirits of the most hardened criminals: Alcatraz. Chapter 16. Alcatraz and the Road to Oblivion. Alcatraz stood perched on a rocky island off the coast of San Francisco Bay. The prison, new at the time, boasted an escape-proof design and a brutally regimented daily schedule. Inmates languished in near isolation. Social privileges were nearly non-existent, with monitored visits and infrequent luxury. News from the outside world was filtered or simply withheld. For someone as accustomed to power and freedom as Capone, the harsh discipline was disorienting. Within Alcatraz, Capone's health further spiraled. The tertiary stage of syphilis ushered in dementia, severe mood swings, and periodic mental confusion. Once a charismatic criminal genius who outwitted entire city governments, he became an ailing shell of a man, disordered in his speech and retreating deeper into hallucinations. Even the occasional contact with family members brought him little comfort. The gangster persona, the cunning mind that orchestrated million-dollar rackets, effectively withered behind Alcatraz bars. Eventually, the authorities released him to a medical facility due to his deteriorating condition. He served out the remaining fragments of his sentence in a Florida home, surrounded by his wife and immediate family, his mind flickering in and out of reality. The fearsome Scarface, who once made entire neighborhoods tremble, hardly recognized his own reflection. By the time of his death in 1947, brought on by a heart attack, the man who had once commanded armies of enforcers was reduced to helplessness. He was only 48. Chapter 17. An enduring legacy in true crime lore. So what remains of Al Capone's story for those fascinated by true crime, organized crime, and dark history in the American narrative? First, he stands as an emblem of how circumstance and ambition can fuse to create the perfect environment for a gangster to flourish. Growing up in underprivileged conditions in Brooklyn, encountering the unscrupulous realm of early 1900s Prohibition, and possessing that innate flair for leadership, these forces propelled him into the spotlight of real Mafia stories. Second, Capone is inseparable from an era that witnessed a collision between local corruption and federal reforms. Without Prohibition, it's unlikely that illicit alcohol sales would have formed the multi-million-dollar backbone of Capone's empire. The measure that was meant to cleanse society ironically birthed an entire black market for bootleg liquor in the 1920s. Capone's crime family took advantage of the limitations of law enforcement, forging a labyrinth of bribery, intimidation, and carefully cultivated alliances. Third, although widely portrayed as the most dominant gangster in U.S. history, the truth is more nuanced. Other powerful syndicate heads often viewed him as reckless, his flamboyant confrontation with the press drawing unwanted attention. National infamous syndicates thrived on secrecy and discreet operations, so the Valentine's Day Massacre was a public relations disaster for anyone involved in organized crime. Indeed, the Atlantic City Conference highlighted that Capone's peers found his style detrimental to their business interests. Yet in the collective imagination, Capone remains bigger than life. Iconic photographs of the dapper man with a scarred cheek, sporting tailored suits and a fedora, remain staples in pop culture. Scores of films, novels, and documentaries revolve around his trajectory. His name has become shorthand for the extravagance and violence characteristic of Prohibition-era gangsters. Enthusiasts of underworld secrets repeatedly delve into archives, searching for lost glimpses of his hidden vaults or rumored riches. The so-called ghost of Capone lingers in old speakeasy tunnels, inciting a mix of terror and curiosity about the heyday of gangster power. Moreover, his downfall underscores the point that sometimes the most mundane offenses, like failing to pay taxes, can topple the mightiest criminals when direct evidence of violence can't be pinned on them. This phenomenon has intrigued true crime connoisseurs for decades, marking a turning point in law enforcement strategies. Indeed, it was one of America's earliest lessons that comprehensive gangster busts might hinge on financial and accounting wizardry rather than gunfights and muscle alone. For the public, this tale is also a reminder of how swiftly moral lines can blur when society attempts to ban a widely desired commodity, in this case, alcohol. Prohibition unleashed a tidal wave of illegal commerce, creating an environment so lucrative that cunning men like Capone rose meteorically. Households struggling to get by from 9-to-5 jobs witnessed liquor barons amassing wealth and traveling in chauffeured limousines. This disparity fueled a perverse admiration for the gangster lifestyle, romanticizing outlaws who flouted an unpopular law. When Capone sank into dementia and died, the country was already transforming. Prohibition had been repealed. U.S. law enforcement gradually modernized. Protocols for forensic investigation were improving. No longer would a gangster so openly intimidate entire cities. While organized crime would remain a problem, it evolved to be more discreet, learned from Capone's mistakes, and found ways to operate deeper underground. And the government, having triumphed with the tax evasion strategy, realized that hitting criminals where it hurt most, their wallets, could yield more tangible results than chasing them on the city streets. From a historical vantage, the trajectory of Al Capone touches on the complexities of assimilation, the pitfalls of forbidden wealth, and the ephemeral nature of gangster glory. Spending his final days in a mental fog, he was far removed from the swaggering, cigar-toting caricature the media had loved and feared. His story, etched into America's dark history, demonstrates how the synergy of unstoppable ambition and a broken legal system can create a public enemy numbered one, so embedded in popular culture that even decades later, his legacy endures. To some, Capone is a cautionary figure. To others, he remains a symbol of the American dream perverted. Someone who seized an opportunity, reaped fortune too immense to handle, and extinguished lives in the process. One might ask, was Capone brilliant or merely brutal? Did he relish his crimes, or was he simply a product of unrestrained times? Regardless, few real mafia stories resonate as strongly in modern imaginations, and even fewer revolve around a figure who generated such paradoxical intrigue, celebrated by some, condemned by most, but never forgotten. Ultimately, this saga resonates whenever we talk about infamous syndicates that tried to overshadow the American justice system. His rise from the day-to-day struggles of a poor immigrant family to the lavish parties in Chicago's high society shows that true crime rarely follows a simple blueprint. It's a swirling tapestry where social discord, legislative missteps, personal ambition, and raw violence combine into a single unstoppable force. Indeed, Al Capone's life remains a template for analyzing how organized crime seizes its chance when the fundamental pillars of society creak under ambiguous laws or inconsistent enforcement. Long after his final breath, the mythic status of Scarface lingers, fueled by the tension between the grim facts of his reign, including the tragic bloodshed of the Valentine's Day massacre, and the aura of a publicity-savvy man who tried to bribe an entire nation into liking him. People watch period dramas, read gangster novels, or uncover old newspaper clippings, searching for glimpses of how one man balanced cruelty with cunning, overcame competition, and eventually succumbed to the unstoppable might of the federal government. Sleuths and historians debate unsolved conspiracies involving hidden money, concealed murders, and the full extent of Capone's empire, unsolved mysteries that continue to pique curiosity long after that final heart attack. Yet his personal story ended in stark isolation, far removed from the glamorous parties and roaring 20s music he once embraced. The moral remains open to debate. Some might glean that crime, no matter how profitable, ends in despair. Others highlight the role of an unjust prohibition that spawned an entire underworld. Still others see him as a strategic mind undone by arrogance. Whatever the interpretation, Al Capone's story is undeniably a cornerstone of American dark history. And so, while the name Scarface might once have stirred fear and awe, it now stands as a reminder of a bygone era, an era of speakeasies, Tommy guns, widespread corruption, and unstoppable ambition. Telling this story anew, we discover a vivid tapestry of betrayal, loyalty, perseverance, and eventual ruin. One can't forget the swirling swirl of politics, the cunning illusions, the murders that shocked an entire generation. All these threads woven together give us a panoramic view of what might happen when the thirst for profit collides with personal ethics in a climate of uncertain law and order. Capone's journey may have ended, but the cautionary echoes it offers remain as potent now as they were nearly a century ago.